This is one of my favorite places to go to in Southern California. This beach just has so many great nooks and crannies. I think it's a great place for us to practice some of the principles that we have learned before that apply to architecture and see how that can be used in a natural environment such as this one. Here I've opted to use the 100 millimeter. I think it's a great lens to capture close up as well as some of the details. It also allows me to zoom in to some of the angles to get a more simplified version of the landscape, and I think it's a great use of this lens. Since this is a longer lens, the setting is a little different. You have to really open up the lens to let more light in, but since we are out here in the bright sunlight, I don't think I need to set my ISO too high. So ISO 100 is good enough for this location. I'm bringing 2 cameras with me today because we're out here in the sandy environment and I don't want to open my lens up and have all of the dust fly into the lens element. So I can easily swap without getting the dirt into my camera every time I change the lens. But if you only have 1 camera and 1 lens, that's totally fine. But if you're gonna do that, just make sure you take extra care because in a windy environment like that, with the dust and the sand, it could be pretty detrimental for your camera. So my philosophy for shooting landscape is very similar to architecture in a way that I'm distilling the scene down to the fewest elements, maybe 2 to 3 elements that can work with each other into a very simple composition. So in this case, it could be the ocean versus the rock, or the edge of the rock versus the horizon line there. I'm using the rule of third. I'm trying to place the edge of the intersection at about 2/3 because when things are off center, it feels a little bit more interesting. One of the things I like to look at is how to observe things from far away as well as up close. I also like to get up really close to the rock and study the lines within it and see how we create almost an abstract pattern. So when you get closer, you discover a totally different level of detail that you didn't see before. Right here, I just noticed a strand of seaweed that just washed up from the ocean. And I feel that that's almost like a nice punctuation for this image. So I'm getting really close to it and capturing that strand as if it is an element in my photograph. So noticing these things that just happen to be maybe an accident, but with closer inspection, they become something really beautiful. When I'm shooting landscape, it could be very busy because there's so much more detail in nature. So what I like to do is basically simplify the image into simple geometric shape. So when I'm looking at the scene here, you can see the rock as triangles and the horizon is almost like a box. And so I want to simplify visually triangles against box and make a composition mentally with these elements. And that could really help simplify the elements and make a really strong image. I also really like shooting into the sun because it really helps further abstract and simplify the shapes even more because everything becomes kind of a silhouette. With this way, you can really see how nature can become geometry almost. I'm going to use my 100 to get close to the detail of the plant life that's washed up on the ocean here. So here I can really get really close, shifting my focus to the edges of the item so it's not smack in the middle. I'm focusing a lot on the small elements on the beach because there's a lot of life forms that are very small to the eye. When I'm shooting architecture, there's not as many elements of nature that you can really get close to. So I think when you're out shooting in nature setting, you can really look at a very, very close proximity to the image and really discover something new. I'm seeing these different patterns created by the ocean, and I think these are a great opportunity for you to discover something that's just created at this moment, and you're here just to capture that. I'm just gonna dig in here and see what kind of macro I can find. I feel free to move the objects around it. So as long as I'm not plucking it out of its natural environment, I feel like it's totally fine for me to reposition and to isolate things physically so that I can create a very clean composition. The reason I like to shoot both in a wide angle as well as macro is that both elements tell a complete story because this is how you see the world. You see things far away as well as you see things when you're close to it. The way you touch it, the way you feel on a very personal level. Of course, a lot of people ask me if I consider Instagram when I shoot the images. And even though I say that I like to just shoot the image and be in the moment and create whatever image that I want at that moment, it definitely comes into play. Having a series of images to tell a story is really helpful, especially nowadays with the carousel. You can show multiple perspectives into a story and really help it unfold in a complete way. So you don't have to limit yourself to just like a wide or an up close. You can have both to tell your story. So I switched over to my other lens just to see the landscape that I'm in a totally different way. Because when I'm using a long lens, I can crop elements that are far away into composition that's not possible with the other wide lens. So here I am with the 100. I'm just cropping into the composition so I can see how the lifeguard station plays with this other shape that's in the foreground. Just take a moment to take it all in and see what else you may not notice. From this perspective, I can see the people on the top. And in this case, the body really gives the landscape a sense of scale. And I feel like now is a great time to go above and get a great wide shot of the beach. And this is where you can get that great epic moment. So I just came up here to get this epic shot. This is the very popular vantage point for this beach. And it's obviously a very beautiful spot, but it's also super crowded today. For my technique of how to find great imagery, you don't have to come to epic, beautiful places like this one. You can find any beach and find these beautiful moments within it, and not having to fight with the crowd or the long lines, the parking, anything like that, and just have your own experience and your own secret place. So while I love shooting at locations that are obviously very beautiful, and many others have found the same obvious location, I think it's much more challenging and rewarding to find these other locations that have not been discovered, that you can make it your own. And I think with these principles of learning how to see, you can find these locations everywhere. So I'm pretty happy with what I shot today, but let's go back to the studio and see what we've shot.